I think what's undoubtedly true is that selling in advertising will come back into fashion and consideration.
Well,
it has already started to do so.
When you and I worked together all those years ago, David Ogilvy was very much out of fashion.
Particularly in
at
London.
Ogilvy and Mather.
Yeah.
Particularly in London.
Yeah.
And I always remember I arranged to get the creative director of Ogilvy and Mather London, a very nice man, to come and do a talk to my staff. And you may well have been there, I don't know. Everyone was there.
Which
A guy called Don Arlott.
Don Arlott, yeah, I met him once, I think. Yes.
And I told David about this, and he said, well, actually, he said to me, he said, I believe you had that mincing pansy from the advertising agency over. He said, is there to be a return engagement? And I said, I suggested the idea, but only 5 of them wanted to turn up because they know it all. So, and I think David was bitter about this, but to get out of the way the question of what does selling look like in the 21st century, selling looks exactly the same in the 21st century as it did in the first century, in the sense that the same principles apply, and the only thing, the area that you're very hot on, which I, being senile, have had to learn all about, which is the internet. I was being interviewed in India about 7 or 8 years ago, and the man who was interviewed, I was on the news, I don't know why, they must have been desperate, you know, no floods, no catastrophes. Yeah. And he said, so what, do you agree that online marketing is direct marketing on steroids? And I said, well, if it were, it would work a lot better. I think it's accelerated direct marketing, and I think that the things that have happened to selling over the centuries have been the way in which you have been able to use more media to sell. And it's funny, I'm doing a webinar this Friday, because I put up something for the 10 best advertising campaigns of the last 10 years. And it's very interesting to see that nothing has really changed very, very much at all.
No.
You know? I think that the sort of changes that have taken place are exemplified by one example that we saw this morning, which you may recall, which is, I think, is one of the most sensationally clever and moving pieces of advertising I've ever seen, because obviously what makes people buy, what makes people inquire, what makes people act, is emotion. And you've probably seen this. It's a campaign which featured Bob Monkhouse, and for anybody who's watching who doesn't know who Bob Monkhouse was, everyone in England will know. He was a very, very famous comedian, probably knew more jokes than anyone else. He came over as a bit of a smart aleck. He wasn't very likeable. He died of prostate cancer. And after he died, the advertising agency that was handling the charity for prostate cancer, one of whose directors actually is somebody who used to work for me, oddly enough, did a campaign where they brought him back from the dead. They had him standing in a graveyard saying, I don't want this to happen to you. It was very, very moving the way it was done.
Yeah.
And it was moving because the thing that distinguishes great advertising from ordinary advertising is the quality of relevant surprise. In fact, I have a little equation that I use, which is sort of R times E squared equals S, which is relevance times emotion squared equals sales. So it's highly relevant. You couldn't get anything more relevant than getting somebody who'd actually died of this, standing and doing a commercial.
And making the appeal.
And making an appeal. Astonishingly surprising, astonishingly moving, surprising not just because it was the idea of a dead man doing it, but the idea of a comedian doing it. I mean, it was astonishing. Now, what was interesting about the campaign was that it didn't just, they also had an event. They had people lying down in the middle of the street somewhere in London, lying prostrate. And I think what's happened over recent years well, in fact, over the centuries, is that gradually new media, new means of selling have come up, or new techniques have come up. I'm quite sure that, in fact, I know that Julius Caesar and people like that were very keen on public relations. Panem et circenses. So they understood the appeal of
sponsorship,
of looking good, of looking good. There was nothing new about it. No. So I'm always amused because, you know, I've been in this game for 50 odd years now, and people constantly say to me, "What's new?" And I say, "Nothing new, just variations on the old." And it's just new media. That's about it.
Well, the Victorians were incredibly innovative in terms of their approach to selling. To some extent, the TV age, which saw one media unusually dominant, was probably an anomaly. And actually, if you're looking to see what the 21st century might look like, you might learn more from the 19th century than from the late 20th or the mid-20th. I don't know. And it does seem to be unprecedented that you have an age, particularly in the United States in the sort of late 50s to the late 80s, when a few network television stations were so dominant as media. I mean, that will never be seen again. And that probably distorted things a little bit, I guess.
Well, it's very, very interesting that I have about 10,000 people, or maybe 12,000 people on my email list. And when I sent out this thing saying, hey, an idea we had last Friday, which we're doing a week after we had it, we're thinking of doing this thing for the 10 best ads. The overwhelming majority, I would say 9 out of 10, and I said any ad in any medium for any purpose, it could be written, it could be an email, it could be a viral campaign, it could be anything you like. The 9 out of 10 are TV commercials.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the great problems of working in any activity, any specialist activity like advertising, is that you are likely to be way, way ahead of your audience. And so I suspect that...
Yep.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I have a client who are one of the 2 biggest sellers of home improvement products in Britain. And 2 years ago, they decided to try some television advertising, which they hadn't done for a long time. And they had a very famous campaign. You know the campaign. It's Everest, who had a very famous man who epitomised the brand. And they found somebody else to epitomise the brand. And they spent a very small amount of money, relatively speaking, on television. But the impact that this has had upon their sales is extraordinary, upon their conversion rate. So, but I do agree with you about the Victorians and people of that period. Claude Hopkins, whom we were talking about earlier on, was a great purveyor of stunts, and he had a client with one of these wonderful names they used to have at the turn of the century, Koto Suet. And so he had the biggest cake in the world, but baked in Koto Suet and placed in the windows of John Wanamaker's store in Chicago. It's a big stunt. But there was nothing new about that. So I think that...
nowadays you do that as a piece of viral, I suppose, wouldn't you, probably? Or
you
PR,
would.
Or PR, yeah.
You would. I mean, the truth, I keep on saying to people, I was actually talking in Chicago about 3 months ago, and nearly all the people in there were people who either were internet entrepreneurs or wanted to be. And I, after a few bad jokes, I said, look, how many of you, you've marketing on the internet? And they all put their hands up. And I said, and you're here because you really think that is the thing, yeah? And they said, yes. And I said, well, can I ask any of you, do any of you read newspapers? Do any of you watch television? Do you occasionally, when desperate, read books? Do you sometimes catch a fleeting glance of a poster? Do you listen to the radio? Media change, times change. Well, John Capel said, times change, people don't. Yeah. Media change, people don't. People don't change. Selling really doesn't change. There are just new techniques, new appeals. I was making some about 30-odd videos in 2 days with a partner of mine in Devon. And he's a great student. And I reckon I've read just, not everything, but an amazing amount of stuff about this business, having a trivial mind and And he had a book that I picked up, which was written by somebody called Haldeman Julius in about 1920. And Haldeman Julius sold tens of millions of little books. They were called Haldeman Julius little books. And what this book was his little book was all about was all the tests that he had done but to see which, and he gave examples where one title would die and the next title for the same book would make a fortune. There was nothing that he was doing that can't be done now, but is not being done. Not being done. Yeah. Here you are. You've got Google Analytics, which is like a great boon to any intelligent marketers. Unfortunately, there's a great shortage of intelligent marketers. In fact, what astounds me about the state of selling today is that we have these weapons that people are not using. I wrote an article the other day for an American online newsletter, and I said I'm going to give you the 7 cardinal sins that people commit online. And the reason I'm giving you these is because we spent a lot of time analysing a lot of websites, and we found that not just a few, not just many, but virtually every single one of them committed these 10 cardinal sins. They didn't offer people any reason to inquire. And people having inquired, they didn't follow them up. They didn't measure. They didn't do lots and lots of very, very simple things, all of which this man, with his little empire of little books, was doing back in 1920 and in the 1900s. I learnt a lot from a man called Maxwell Sackheim, who wrote a marvellous book called My First 60 Years in Advertising. It's my ambition to overtake him. I've got about 7 years to go. And my first great triumph when I learnt all about testing, partly because of reading David Ogilvy's book, was when I literally read something that this man had done in 1900 or 1898, something like that, where he tested one ad against another. Yeah? And what I did was I literally wrote an ad which copied this ad which had been written. This was about 1964, 60-odd years ago. People do not learn. People do not learn. And furthermore, I think the more sophisticated the media, the more money that's thrown at it, the more this disguises a lack of knowledge of the essentials. And that was the great thing. One of the great things about David Ogilvy. As you know, I spent about 8 years working with him, and I was very surprised to find out that he liked me. It was really because he was very clever. He didn't really know whether he liked you or not. He was no chance of getting a swollen head with David. And I've spent a bit of time over the years trying to find out what made him so remarkable. And one or two of the characteristics that made him so remarkable have to do with selling. He always said that people knew me as a great copywriter. He said, but what I was very good at, he said, was selling, getting business. And I remember we had an event outside Paris for all our creative directors at our old agency, which is now Ogilvy One. And I asked David if he would talk about his failures. And he said, I've got an hour. He said, Drayton's asked me to talk about my failures. He said, that will take 3.5 minutes. The rest of the time I'll tell you about what I got right. And he talked about his ability to sell. And he had this wonderful phrase. He said, I always used to like to go there on my own, he said, because I don't like people watching me making love. So I was fascinated to see how David sold.
He'd take a media person with him occasionally, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
He argued that was the one area where he had no
didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah. But by and large, the new business pitch from Ogilvy was David himself and no one else.
Well, I mean, this is one of David's things. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
No. I wrote about that last night.
He said, so we had, I don't know whether you were with us at that time, but we had this account called Magnet, and we hadn't got it. We were about to get it, and I went to Paris to have lunch with the chairman and with David and with the managing director. And so I was fascinated to see what David would do. And he did a number of things, small things that encapsulate what selling is about today, tomorrow, yesterday, 300 years ago, whenever you like. The first thing he did was that as we went into the dining room, he took hold of the chairman's arm by the elbow. Yeah. So what you have to do if you want to sell people is make a connection. Make a connection. If you can't do it physically, somehow make an emotional connection. You know.
I'd be hopeless at that. I have a complete horror of any kind of sort of unwanted physical contact. But it works. I mean, there's behavioural economics experiments showing the effect that on the average tip, if the waiter can somehow contrive convincingly to touch you, put a hand on arm, or some way establish physical contact, the average tip level goes up pronouncedly. They've done experiments on this. Quite interesting.
I wonder if I could get more money out of clients on this basis.
A bit of frotcherism somehow or other. Yeah, I know.
So the next thing he did, after we'd sat down, this is the other thing, he'd done his research. If you want to sell to people, something you know about somebody is more important than anything you can possibly say. Yeah. So he always did his research. And after we'd sat down, he turned to the chairman, who was a plain, blunt-spoken Yorkshireman, and said, "Do you have a university degree, Tom?" And Tom Duxbury said, "No." And then he turned to Matthew Ingle, the managing director, and he said, "Do you have a university degree, Matthew?" And Matthew said, "No." And then he turned to me and he said, "Drayton," he said, "do you have a university degree?" And he knew I didn't because I'd walked out of university. And then he said, "Nor do I." And then he paused and he said, "Haven't we done well?" So that's the next thing you do. You create a sort of emotional complicity. Yep. You flatter somebody. Ooh. You make them feel as though, you're on the same level as me.
For a man who did go to Christchurch, Oxford for 2 years. I always thought he made, given that he went to the poshest college in Oxford for, I think, 1 or 2 years, I thought he was slightly overplayed his hand.
But he didn't get a degree.
You're absolutely right, he didn't have a university degree.
He didn't get a degree. And he knew that Tom Duxbury was the kind of person who didn't get a degree. And I think I'm doing a talk in Florida at the end of the year, and I don't suppose any of the people who see me will see this. So they've asked me to give people one single thing that will really transform their businesses. And I've racked my brains, I've got to talk for about an hour. I can't think, all these people are very keen students. What the hell can I say to them? And I remember David saying to me one night over dinner in Claridge's, "Do you know the secret of success in this business, Drayton?" And I said, "No, David, what is it?" And he smiled wolfishly and said, "Charm." And I think charm is people always say this. Somebody was talking to me the other day about print salesmen, saying what a bunch of bores they were. And I said, well, there was a print salesman that used to come into my agency back in the late 70s and early 80s, and we used to look forward to it because he was such fun. He was very, very, very charming. And I don't think these qualities will ever cease to be important, and I don't care what kind of medium you use. I think that one of the campaigns that we're going to talk about on Friday almost certainly is the Dove campaign. And that has its own strange charm because for the first time an advertiser actually admits that, hey, we're talking about normal people here.
Disarming, honesty.
It's disarming.
Yeah, absolutely.
The definition which somebody gave me, which I've used, is the secret of charm is the ability to make both of you feel you're wonderful.
That's very nice. Yeah.
And he had that, but he had a number of other qualities.
It's worth remembering, actually, of course, he was the uncle of Ian Ogilvy.
He was
very nearly James Bond.
Exactly.
And so there's obviously a family thing going on. Funnily enough, if you subscribe to Alibi, I think actually on the Sky package, you get Alibi TV, and they're running the whole 1970s series of The Saint. The Saint. Which is worth watching for...
But I watched it originally.
No, I did. Watched it as a kid, yeah. It's fantastic.
Did you?
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm just rewatching those at the moment. But there was patently some sort of ancestral thing there, that the power to be really, really charming.
No, I think he had it. He's had it in spades.
Incidentally, the other interesting quality of charm is that it's more or less universally applied, and that charming people are charming to everybody, for the most part. What's interesting is that quite a lot of advertising nowadays obsesses about things like cool. Now, we were having a discussion about this morning, that actually only 5% of the population are really interested in being cool. There's huge swathes of people, don't play. What's interesting about charm, whether it be animals, kittens, etc., is that it's more or less a universal currency, isn't it? There aren't very many people who aren't moved by it.
Well, yeah, I think there are certain characteristics, certain things that always work.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, animals, interestingly, in terms of TV advertising, animals are arguably better than people. Just in terms of being charming.
Well, they're safer, yeah.
They're safer, yeah.
Actually,
it's harder to hate them, probably, yeah. But
I'll tell you who had a lot of charm. At the time when we were working together, most of the people, the experts, reckoned that the best direct mail copywriter in the world was Bill Jamie, whom I became quite friendly with. And
is he still alive?
No, he died. But if you read his copy, it again had the most enormous charm. Yeah. But that charm really only worked with a very narrow segment of people, and Bill was quite frank about the fact that he said, I write for people like me, I write for myself.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily the route to success.
It was relatively upmarket, monthly and weekly
sophisticated.
Sort of the New Yorker, Harper's, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And you find a lot of people in this business have a very narrow gamut of, abilities. I think one of the salesman-like qualities that David had, which will always apply, came out to me when I was having breakfast with Ken Roman, who used to run Ogilvy and Mather, I think in the Hyatt in New York, and I said to him, because I asked everyone this question, I'm being a copywriter, I'm innately curious, what made David so remarkable? And Ken said, I've done reasonably well, and I think one of the reasons I've done reasonably well is that I don't give up. If I've got something that I believe in and I'm going to work at, I'll keep plugging away. Other people might give up after a few months or a year or so. I'll keep going for 2, 3, 4 years. He said, but David never gives up. 40 years. And there is no question whatsoever that persistence, which incidentally a lot of chief executives who were questioned a couple of years ago said was the number one quality you had to have, persistence. It's the number one quality you have to be if you want to sell. I have an example.
There's a Churchill, isn't there, which is success is simply going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm or something.
Courage is the ability to go from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, which is having had more failures than most, so I can really relate to that.
Churchill had a pretty impressive... And very interesting to read the early years.
And he never made it, and he was always broke. From the start to finish, he was always broke. Yeah. He was always broke. But I think persistence, very, very strong. There's, I remember McGraw-Hill did some research that showed that the average point at which a sale was made was after the 6th visit. But my favourite example of this is a client of mine who sells, believe it or not, temporary buildings. And so people go onto the website, we collect the names, and we follow them up. And about 2 years ago, that client rang up my partner and said, guess what, I've just sold a building to somebody that I've never spoken to, because he tries to speak to people on the phone, after the 14th follow-up. And I told this story, I think in a video I was doing, for a training video for somebody. And my partner, Al, who actually deals with this client, sent me an email immediately and said, you must be kidding. We now send out 118 follow-ups. Because, you know, your customer wants to buy when your customer wants to buy, not when you want to sell. And I think all these basic human characteristics are the
This is
key.
a very interesting thing, because what I think we're straying into here is that advertising became, it should not have become so, but it became, how to influence human preference and perception. Okay. The only problem is that salesmanship requires a bit more than that. And the point I think here is that, I mean, there's quite an interesting thing. I was just reading about this weird thing developed by Ludwig von Mises called praxeology, which is the study of human behaviour. And the use of the word apparently goes back to the 17th century, and there's a whole discussion in ethics saying that you can be an ethical person and not behave ethically. That you can fundamentally have ethical intent but behave unethically, and they separated what they called almost the attitudinal component of ethics from the action.
Oh, you're talking about the time when I made a lot of money selling cigarettes,
But
which now I feel ashamed of, but at the time I was delighted.
No. But the interesting thing is, there is this, and behavioural economics is starting to reveal it. There are two, I mean, a very good phrase, I think Paul Feldwick separates it. He says of brands that there is sales and there is saleability. And first of all, there's the perceptual thing, which is you create the desire, the perception, so on, for that thing. Then there's the individual bit of selling, which may be about persistence, timeliness, context, etc. And that one of the things that probably happened with conventional advertising is it got obsessed with perception as a proxy measure of success, and failed to realise that unless you convert, you can actually create kind of perception interrupters. In other words, all the desire and fashionability in the world which doesn't convert into actual sales. And that there are two components to, to marketing, if you like, one of which is getting people to think of you as you would like them to think. But actually the behavioural component is slightly separate. Do you buy that?
I think it's happened, but I think it's a very bad thing that
It's a terribly bad thing. And I my view as well, that the direct marketing to some extent came into existence. I mean, I suppose if you look at it, a lot of advertising, the early clients were packaged goods. And so the actual moment of sale happened on a supermarket shelf with no real advertiser intervention, which was someone moving their hand 2 feet to the right or the left. And that was preference then expressed through behaviour. But if you're selling temporary buildings, the practice of doing that, it is simply not enough to actually be known, be respected and be famous.
Well, no, you can divorce the two.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's very, very efficient.
No, nor would I choose to divorce them. But I think it's interesting that advertising became obsessed with one to the complete neglect of the other.
I think there's a very good reason for that, because it's a bloody sight easier
to do the one.
to do that.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
They used to have a saying that advertising takes the horse to water and direct marketing makes it drink. I've had, staying with me at the moment, a very, very clever Belgian lady who's a very high-flying executive secretary. And being intelligent, she was, after a bit, she asked me what did I actually do? And I tried, and what do you mean direct marketing? What are you talking about? And I said, well, Marta, my partner, said, well, it's making people buy things through messages, or making them act through messages. And I said, well, actually, to give you the sort of perfect example, I can take you all the way from knowing nothing whatsoever about something to spending a lot of money on it. And I'll give you an example, because I had a client a few years ago, and this was worth millions to the people who ran it. I mean, this is what people don't understand. What we do is worth millions to people. In some cases, tens and hundreds of millions. This firm were selling an investment course, a course on how to invest. And they had a piece of direct mail, they had an advertisement, they had an insert, all of which were doing fine. And they came along to me and they said, do you think you could do better? And I said, I don't know, I'll have a go. And I had a go, and the first time I didn't do that well. I did better. I got more replies, but it didn't really make much difference. Then the second time, I managed to improve their sales by about 40%. So they all made millions, which is wonderful. They did it very well just before the market went, yeah! So the people who bought it were not too happy. But I said to this lady, Benedict, she's called, I said, look, when people received that piece of direct mail that I'd written, they had never heard of the course, you know?
No.
And by the time they had read my 8-page letter and the brochure and blah, 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 some of them bought it. So you can take them all the way from knowing nothing about it to doing something about it. And whether the segmentation of things down to this is the bit that builds the image, this is the bit that does that, blah, 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 this is...
Whether it's healthy to separate the two, I mean...
Well, I think most people don't know what they're doing anyhow. I was writing an article the other day about the fact that most people don't know what they're doing, and you were talking earlier on about James Webb Young, who definitely wrote one of the 4 best books on advertising, which was
How to Become an Advertiser.
How to Become an Advertising Man.
Yeah.
And he is the only person, as far as I'm aware, who managed to intelligently divide the 5 principal functions of advertising, you know, all starting with creating awareness, building a brand, you know, reminding people, overcoming inertia.
Overcoming inertia being brilliant, yeah.
Yeah. And I was saying in this piece that actually most people in this business are so unprofessional that they don't really, really know what they're doing. They parrot these catchphrases like awareness and building a brand. And I gave an example of some people I was doing a seminar for in California, a big wine company. And they sent me a brief, and I said, so what are you trying to do? And they said, we're trying to build a brand. So I said to my contact there, so how many different, you know, labels have they got? And he said, well, they've got this and they've got that and everything else. And as we were coming from the airport, there was a big poster there which had their name all over it. And I said, one of these illuminated jobs. So I said, how much does that cost a year, George? And he said, $250,000. And he said, that. And I said, well, they can spend $250,000 from now until Kingdom Come. They will never build a brand. They have not, people do not sit and think carefully enough about what they're trying to do. And if you don't know what you're trying to do, you'll end up doing, who knows what you'll end up doing, but you won't end up doing the right thing.
There is something from direct marketing which I always think is healthy when applied to anything. And the old direct marketing approach was start with the coupon, if you like.
Yeah.
Start with what you want people to do.
Start with what you want to do. Yeah.
And that generally seems to be a healthy, a healthy approach to any problem. Simply that if you haven't got the last hurdle right, none of the preceding hurdles will have any use anyway. If
you don't know where you're going, you could end up anywhere.
Yeah.
You know.
And so, that all seems, and that's where actually, which probably distinguishes the salesman in this business from the others, which is that understanding of if you set a target as a behavioural target. There's some evidence from the IPA data bank that those advertising campaigns that have been briefed with a behavioural end are considerably more successful than those that have been briefed with some proxy measure like awareness or brand building.
Exactly. I want to know
human
where
problem solving is better if it has
if I know what problem I'm going to solve.
Do you just a very quick question. Is there a particular, IBM has a signature selling method, P&G, the persuasive selling format. Is there a particular philosophy other than the James... I like your point about the James Webb Young one. He was the first person who said, look, this thing works in 5 different ways. Any other particular philosophy or format that you've admired?
I still use the same things. I've been teaching now essentially 2 formulae. I'm alarmed, actually. I go back to things I was teaching, 30 years ago. I haven't changed. I'm a one-trick pony, and it's not even my trick. So, the 2 things that I adhere to are the 5 Ws. Who are you talking to? what do you want them to do, where will you find them, when should they speak to you, when should you speak to them, why should they do what you want them to do. And I used to, because when we used to work together, I had this ghastly job eventually of going around the world doing all sorts of things. But one of the things that people would always do is give me an insoluble problem and lock me in a small room and say, you better solve it because your plane's leaving in an hour and a half. And I always used to apply the 5 Ws. And if you can define accurate, and this is the most important thing is who you're talking to. That's where, as Peter Drucker said, there is only one profit centre in business. This is your customer. So first of all, you decide where the money's coming from. Who am I talking to? If I can say something about you that relates to you, I've got you, because that's the beginning of persuasion.
Jeff Bezos, wonderful, on Bloomberg, he was interviewed about Amazon. And he said, look, he's more or less saying, the iPad will be fine. Don't worry about the iPad. His point was, my Kindle basically serves a different audience. My job is to concern myself with my customer, not to get obsessed with what the hell people are doing on some iPad somewhere. He also made the point that the most common activity on the $170 Kindle was, I think, reading probably Stieg Larsson. The most common activity on the $700, $800 iPad is playing Angry Birds, which is a game which involves firing birds at pigs, which then explode. It's actually quite a good game. But his point is, he said, don't worry about your competitors. Your competitors aren't going to give you any money. He said, your customers will. Therefore, worry about the customers.
This is a huge...
Beautiful, just simple good phrase.
Absolutely.
He was great, actually. I mean, if you can dig it out, it may still be on Bloomberg. Bloomberg being Bloomberg.
Round and round and round and round.
But Bezos on Bloomberg was fantastic.
He's a very funny man. I've got a thing that I always use from... Anyhow, we're getting off the point.
Sorry, yeah.
So the 5 Ws to me, who are you talking to? What do you want them to do? The most important thing. And then all the other things like where will you find them? When should you talk to them?
The when, I think, in the digital era is becoming bigger, isn't it? Because the means to target a when, unless it's your Christmas, I mean, seasonality always existed as a when. But actually behavioural targeting, the ability to target someone by moment is huge.
It's really... I send out, a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And somebody wrote to me the other day and said, I've got a friend who's a creative director in Bristol who doesn't want to go onto your webinar because he thinks you send out too many emails. And I said, well, about a mile or so away from where your friend is my friend, Alex Davis, who is the marketing director of Hargreaves Lansdown, who are the most successful people in financial services in this country. And he always said to me, and I agree, that if you're not getting any complaints, you're not mailing enough. And I'm very concerned that your friend is the first person to complain about my emails, despite the fact that I send out at least, 40 or 50,000 a week. I should be sending out more.
Cool.
And one of the
things... You only had one complaint.
I'm very distressed, and this was indirect too. I must find something more offensive to do.
It's a very good phrase, that, actually, man. If there's a great philosophical point. If you're not getting any complaints, you're not sending enough. There's a great comment. Someone told me, they said, if you've never missed a plane, you've spent too much of your life waiting around at airports. Which is very good, when you think about it, it's actually not a bad point. Yeah. But that's interesting, yeah. If you,
the thing is, I can tell you, because I keep on measuring it all the time, that to my surprise, I found that what everyone was telling me, which is don't mail on Sunday, email on Sunday. Oh boy. I always email on Sunday if I can, because there is a certain type of person who is the kind of, as my partner Al put it, he said, look, the kind of guy who's reading his emails on Sunday, he's seriously interested.
Yes.
So there's this dimension of not only where will I get the most response, or when will I get the most response, what kind of people will respond. I don't think I do a very good job, and I don't think anybody, and this is a big problem with selling online. If you define one of the essential roles of marketing as finding out, to use that boring phrase, cost-effective, the most cost-effective way of doing things, what you're doing is what Warren Buffett does when he's trying to invest. He tries to find undervalued things. So when the internet came along, and particularly when email manifested itself, it was grossly underpriced. And because it was grossly underpriced, people got amazing results. And because they were getting amazing results. If you're getting amazing results, you don't try. I've got a phrase that I was trotting around Eastern Europe a couple of years ago, saying that bad times breed good habits and good times breed bad habits.
Yeah.
So if you're getting fantastic responses, you don't try and you don't measure. Most people do not measure.
Well, I think there's an analogy there, which is you can have an idea which is too good, in the sense it's so good that it's so lucrative that actually nobody. The classic example, I think, timeshare. I think timeshare was a fantastic idea. You don't want to own a second home for 52 weeks of the year. You probably want one for about 2. Okay? What a brilliant idea. But it was such a good idea that actually nobody had to give any thought. It became completely dominated by crooks and charlatans, and the whole thing collapsed.
And this is what's happened on the internet. What happens?
Email marketing was too good. Yeah.
Email marketing has been so successful that people have developed bad habits, and B, every bloody crook in the universe has landed there. I mean, I'm a connoisseur of the kind of things that people send me. I got one yesterday. And it's just aimed at idiots who will believe that all you have to do is spend 10 minutes and you'll get rich. But anything that works, and in the same way that early advertising attracted a lot of crooks. So that again is if you have a very, very strong selling medium, which you have right now. That's one of the things you can look at in terms of selling in the 21st century. There's a lot of bloody rogues around.
Yeah.
A lot of rogues around. Very difficult to police. Going back to your other question about the formulae that I like, apart from the 5 W's, I still adhere to attention, interest, desire, conviction, action.
Yeah.
And I think that if you don't include all those ingredients, you will fail. And that's a salesman's formula. It's not a direct marketing formula. The 5 W's.
Typewriters at the great in some event. Did you hear about this?
No.
No, crikey. The whole reason it came about was there were something like 10 or 15 people selling typewriters at one of these sort of great exhibition type things, not in London, some American thing. And they went around discovering why one salesman was more effective than the other, and the formula was actually developed from there.
Really?
It might have been the most successful salesman said it was his own personal little mantra.
In that case, I count myself lucky. I've learnt something. I always
it was only AIDA, the conviction was added.
Yeah.
I think that's an important addition, in fact.
I think so. Yeah. And I think if there's anything out of that formula that's missing, where does it go wrong? Where do people fail? Claude Hopkins, God bless him, used to say, no man buys from a clown. And a great deal of advertising today is clownish, particularly in the car industry. Failing to think of any reason why people should buy a car, they decide they're going to make it do clever tricks.
Which is interesting because people might actually buy beer from clowns, or not necessarily beer, but they might buy fun things from clowns. But a car is arguably a pretty serious purchase with quite a lot of risk attached. I agree with Jeremy Bullmore's distinction that there are, broadly speaking, things that are bought out of discretionary income and things that are bought out of a budget, and that you apply slightly different approaches to both.
There are things you care about. I mean, there's all sorts of things. The way in which people buy things has got everything to do with how much they cost. With the two things, how much do they cost and how much does it matter to you? I was talking about brands, and I said, well, there are some things you don't really care that much about chewing gum.
No.
It would be very difficult for me to write something really intensely interesting on the subject of chewing gum.
Yeah.
But you care deeply about your new car.
Yeah.
You think about it, you agonise about it, yeah? And I don't think people pay enough attention to the difference between those things that people care about and those things that do. This morning, what I was writing was some copy for some people who sell holidays. And their managing director doesn't believe, despite the fact that we proved it several times, that long copy will do better than short copy. He is so familiar with what he sells because it's his family's business, that he can't believe that anyone will read a 4-page letter about holidays. But people dream about their bloody holidays. No.
There's a bit of evidence in psychology that actually you get more pleasure out of anticipating your holiday than you do on going on the bloody thing.
Well, there was
that doesn't surprise me at the first.
Wasn't there some? Yeah, there was some research that came out. What was it, 2 weeks ago? That said, in fact, it was which I was encouraged by because I'd never have time for long holidays, and it said apparently short holidays are much better for you.
Yeah, you don't get acclimatised to the same thing. Basically, you wake up on day 6 in Barbados, and you go, here we go again. You see, whereas actually taking lots of frequent micro breaks is a much better thing to do.
Well, apparently there's all the angst that people go through when they, deciding where they're going to go.
The other thing that's apparently quite good is if you do go away for 10 days on holiday, work for 2 days in the middle, if you can, if you're a writer or whatever.
Unfortunately, I work practically every day.
Yeah, I'm sorry, actually.
Yeah. But, I think the big element that people miss out of that formula, and which is why the Dove campaign is so good, the big element that people miss is the conviction bit, as you were saying. You don't see people using testimonials very much, but the whole Dove campaign is one vast testimonial. Actually, if you want to see how people sell today, I used to, you may recall this, I used to send out a memo when I was a creative director called Common Sense Creative, which everyone called bird droppings. And one of them I sent out, I said, I wrote a list of headlines or headings that I'd seen on the fronts of magazines. And I said to everybody, look, this is what you're competing with. You'd better try and find... Steve Harrison, whom I keep in touch with, whom I had lunch with on Saturday, does a talk for me at a seminar that I run. And he starts by standing up and saying, more or less, look, the first thing you have to realise is that nothing you are going to write will be as interesting as the weather forecast. Yeah? So, if you want to know what really, really interests people, watch what they're looking at. And one very good example in this country is Gok Wan, the guy, the Chinese guy, or guy of Chinese origin with a name like that, who does makeovers for girls. If you want to know what selling's all about in the 21st century, watch Gok Wan at work, watch him go into a shopping centre and watch him do what we are supposed to do with advertising and with selling, which is take a problem and solve it for people. Yeah. So he takes a girl who thinks she's ugly or thinks she's got a bad figure or thinks she can't or knows that she can't dress well, and he transforms her. She's happy, the crowd is happy, the TV station is happy. It's basic selling. It won't change. It will never change. I'm sure it will never change. I'm always astounded with this. What's new? I remember years ago I was asked to do a talk in Australia about what's new, and I said, if some of you people would get your heads around what's old and works and stop worrying about what's new, you'd do a damn sight better.
Well, I think the problem has been, generally, that we've become preoccupied with the means and got confused between the means and the ends. And the interesting thing is that, in a sense, the two most revered, possibly the three most revered, if you include someone alongside Ogilvy and Birnbach, if you include someone a little weirder, I'm a bit of a fan of Gossage, for example. But particularly Ogilvy and Birnbach were obsessed with human psychology first.
Yeah. And
were then secondarily interested in what advertising might do to influence it. And of course, Birnbach's point is that actually human nature hasn't really changed much in the last 50,000 years. A few of the means we might actually manipulate it or change it have changed a little bit. But the fundamentals are still the same. The need for... I thought it interesting. I thought Sonny Balls was a very, very interesting TV commercial. My problem was that the C was missing. In that when I got into the shop to buy a Sonny Bravia, there wasn't a single sentence that explained why I should pay £500 more for a Sonny than for the equivalent Toshiba. There wasn't a single tiny bit of point of sale that just said we've got 3 HDMI slots rather than 2.
Because what happens when you have a multiplicity of media at your disposal and an incredible array of things, gimmicks, devices, morphing things, this, that, and the all kind. You can do all sorts of. Then technique takes over and people substitute technique for an idea, and that's the great danger of having all these weapons at your disposal. And I think those people who are able to focus intently on what they're trying to do, and not be distracted by all the things they could do, and have the ability, like a great chef, to choose the right ingredients. Those are the people who will survive, and I think that's a very difficult thing to do.
Harder and harder.
It's a harder and harder thing to do. Yesterday, we were doing a SlideShare presentation, and it occurs to me the number of different alternatives that we had to doing a SlideShare presentation. We could have done a video. We could have sent somebody a load of emails. We could have, we could have sent them a link. We could have stuck it up on YouTube. We could have done all sorts of things. I find, being practically bloody senile, I find keeping up with it all quite a challenge, to say the least of it. But I also think that young people who should know better find it quite a challenge too. The terrible thing is they don't realise it. Of course, when I was young, I was a genius. I don't know what the hell went wrong.
I think, well, partly, if you've grown up with this thing, maybe you feel you're doing it instinctively. Maybe you just trust your instincts too highly as well. The other danger, of course, as you quite rightly said, is that no one's more enthusiastic about this new stuff than me. But I'm at the same time conscious that at times it's a dangerous distraction. That actually, in many areas of business, it should be occupying, 10, 15% of people's attention. Instead, it's occupying 65.
Absolutely. I think it's a bit like the writing process. I've written for a living since I was 19, so that's a long time. That's 53 years I've written for a living. Yeah? And a lot of people don't realise that the secret of being able to write well is nothing to do with the bloody writing itself. That helps. But it's to do with the amount of time you spend thinking before you write, the amount of research you do, the amount of brooding you do, and then the amount of effort you put into rewriting it afterwards. I have a client who I don't like very much, actually, but in fact he's not a client anymore, he resigned the business, but he is an absolute genius at focusing on getting people to do things. And I think that being able to focus on getting people to do things and making it easy for people to do things, in other words, that end result, is something that takes an immense amount of study, and very few people have it. And I think the other thing is the focus on making it easy for people to do what you want them to do is woefully neglected. And what's amazing, you see, I must have done about 20 videos where all I'm doing is saying, make it easy for people to. No, I'm just sitting there in front of them and I'm saying, thank you for visiting me. All you have to do is to go down here and sign there, or over here and sign there, because it works. It's deceptively simple, and it's the equivalent of what I was brought up with, which was the pair of scissors around a coupon. Of course. The perfect nudge, in a sense, isn't it? A pair of scissors somehow. Yep. And that's the other thing that people have lost completely, in this sort of maelstrom of technique. Little things that I notice all the time, because I know they make a big difference. I never write something to somebody without asking them at least 3 times to do something. I was doing a landing page for somebody the other day, and or I was editing it, actually. Somebody else wrote it, and I was editing it. And when we finished it, I showed it to my partner, Marta, whose background was with internet marketing. And she said, "You haven't asked people to act often enough." And I knew immediately she was right. I knew that. And you see, what do great salesmen do? If they're talking to you, assuming they've attracted your attention, assuming they've made you like them, assuming you're interested, the next thing they look at you and see I wonder if he's ready to buy.
Yep.
And they try a trial close. And that's exactly what you do with a landing page. Yeah? Although a lot of people, I have to say that, you know, I sort of live in two different worlds because I've had a background in sort of, you might call corporate marketing, but nearly all the clients I deal with now are very entrepreneurial.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in that you're both lucky. I mean, in many senses, you're lucky in that.
I'm lucky and I'm unlucky.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money in, you know, in what you do.
Side. Yeah, absolutely right.
And there's a lot less money in what I do. But
ironically, perhaps.
Yeah, no, it's true. Except when I do something for myself, which can do quite well. But I don't think that many people in corporate marketing have the faintest bloody idea about how to sell at all. And I think if anyone wants to know how to sell in the 21st century, my advice to them is very simple. Go and watch what the crooks are doing. Watch what those crooks on the internet are doing. They are very, 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 very smart. Claude Hopkins, that David's, you know, the man that David praised so much. How did he pick up his skills? Selling very, very dodgy patent medicines, yeah?
Yeah.
The devil has many of the best tunes, and I think you should learn to hum them at least. And I think a lot of people don't realise that. You go where you learn the best lessons. You might be surprised. There's something about television. And I remember there was research years ago from Gallup which said, you know, that's still very, very powerful in adding conviction, as seen on TV.
There's some game theory behind it which says that because television is expensive, by visibly investing a lot in your reputation, it says to people, you have a big reputation to lose. Therefore, you know, someone, you know, it's someone, in other words, who puts money behind their reputation.
I think it's. No, I just think it's. I think
it's just fame.
It's just it's fame. It's just, you know, hey, if it's on TV, it must be true.
I mean, it's on TV, it must be true. The heuristic of kind of, you know, 10 million people have seen this, so, you know, either it's a spectacular lie or it's probably true. Yeah.
No, it's just a variation on the old thing I read about you in the papers. And people always say to me, you know, you've written 5 books, so what good have you made a lot of money? And I say no, but if I've written a book, they think, you know, he must have some competence.
No.
And I mean, look at the way that in the world of the groves of academy, you know, one of the main things that these professors have to do is bang out books which nobody reads. It doesn't matter.
But it's actually a first hurdle to...
Yeah, I mean, I can always remember when I was doing work for INSEAD, they said, oh, there's this marvellous professor called Henry Mintzberg who's still very, you know, highly rated, and you must read his stuff. It's incomprehensible. And all he was saying at the time, was something very simple, which is that you don't arrive at conclusions by, you know, logical steps. You make a creative leap and assume something, and then you go back and prove it. We all know that.
We all know that, yeah.
In this game, in the advertising game, it's always the same. You have the idea for the commercial, and then you try and explain to the client why it's such a brilliant idea. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with post-rationalisation.
Absolutely nothing at all.
Never understood why there's any objection to post-rationalisation.
No, you should.
I mean, most things, I mean, penicillin's post-rationalised.
Yeah,
completely.
exactly.
Aspirin, they hadn't got a clue why it worked for something like 80 years. Who cares? You know, if the headache goes away, it's good enough. I don't know. That's a very bizarre thing. The idea that to make something, first of all, the idea that you necessarily want to make things scientific in the first place is an interesting obsession. But the second thing is the assumption that for something to be scientific, it has to proceed with a kind of sequential logic, when most science doesn't proceed through a kind of sequential logic.
No, there's certain leap. You make leaps.
And the inability to do that's a problem. It's not a, you know. In fact, the idea that these leaps are somehow dubious. A few very quick ones. If you had to predict 3 selling approaches, now I don't know quite what they mean by approaches, that will become more effective 5 years from now. I mean, one thing I would include is mobile. And the reason I think mobile is important is one thing only.
Look, people say to me, what's the next big thing? And I just say, mobile. It's just numerical. There's 60 million of the bloody things there and only 20 million computers. End of story.
The second reason is the why, which is that the ability to do something instantaneously when the mood strikes is simply important.
No, exactly. I have a client who came to me about 6 months ago. I don't know what's happened to them. They were doing a launch, but the whole thing revolved around the fact that it was much easier to get people to text something than it was to get them to send an email, because there they were, because it's never, that damn little thing is never more than a metre away from them. So it's just...
Beautiful thing, I don't know if you know about this, I've got a little, if you go to economistdirect-direct.com, you can leave them a credit card and your home address, and it's a kind of, it's what I call the 21st century subscription. Every week on Thursday, I think it is, they send me a text saying, this is what's in tomorrow's Economist, with a very brief summation. If you want us to send you a copy, reply with the word buy, and we'll charge you £2.40, which is less than the £4 or whatever it is you pay for the cover price, and we'll post you a copy. If you don't do anything. So I reply with buy, I guess, about 50% of the time. But the very simple thing is it's a very, very easy thing to do.
Well, I'll tell you, again, the business of marketing is the business of choosing the right weapon. So that what's working phenomenally well on the phones is very time-sensitive things like the pizza people are making a bloody fortune.
Yeah.
You know, just...
You're watching telly, your phone is there.
And bingo, would you like a pizza? That's worked extremely well for, I think it's Papa John, I'm not sure. Could have
Papa
been.
John's on mobile. I think Domino's has done one as well.
Domino's has done extremely well.
Yeah.
But it's merely the availability of the damn things. It's just, you just go back to say, the computer was not such a fantastic thing when there weren't many of them around. When there are lots of them around, it's a fantastic thing.
When you have broadly speaking,
well, exactly.
1.1 mobile phones per person.
There is nothing new. The newspaper advertising was not very successful before steam printing, when it was bloody expensive, and hardly anyone could read. What surprises, I have to say that in my view, a lot of people take the business that we're engaged in and try to make it complicated, and they try to make it complicated for a couple of reasons. Number one, my goodness, if it's complicated, it must be worth paying a lot of money for.
Yeah.
My goodness, if it's complicated, these people must be clever. My goodness, if I am involved in a business which is so complicated, I must be clever. So it's all sort of a
self-aggrandizement.
It's a form of masturbation, actually. But it's not complicated. It's very, very simple. That was the great thing about Ogilvy. Ogilvy made it nice and simple. And if I were going to do a commercial for me, I would say that the only reason that damn book I wrote in 1982 is still selling year after year, I just made it simple, because I'm a bit bloody simple myself. A great advantage in these hard times.
There are probably about 5, it would be interesting, just as you said, there are 5 ways advertising works as laid down. I think there are about 5 really important things to know in salesmanship. One of them, by the way, is just, and Warren Buffett or someone in general would appreciate this, disproportionality, that very, very small trivial things can have a huge effect. There are laws from the internet that if you can reduce your checkout procedure from 3 clicks to 2 or 3 pages to 2, your sales go up by 50%.
It's phenomenal. I mean, it makes a phenomenal difference, and it's not, sophisticated strategy. It's just, can you make it easy?
Can you make it really easy? And then the return is spectacular. The problem is that because it's not lucrative for agencies doing stuff that is trivial, nor does it suit people's self-aggrandizement, everybody tends to want to look for big, heroic solutions.
You are not going to go and win an award because you're the guy who decided that you were going to ask for the order 3 times at the end of the letter, or whatever.
No.
Actually, as
you might lose an award by having too large a coupon. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I remember Ken Roman when we had a big jamboree in New York, and one of my partners in Australia said to him, "Why didn't you show any direct mail?" And Ken said, "How can you make an envelope look sexy?" And I always used to say, nobody goes into their local club, their golf club, and says, "Look at my new envelope."
No.
But they can say, "Look at my great viral campaign. Everyone's watching this dancing chicken," or whatever.
I did a piece about this because it's interesting. There's an economist called Esther Duflo who adopts what I described her actually, I think, on a blog as Drayton Bird meets Mother Teresa. Because what she does is she adopts absolutely conventional direct marketing, common sense direct marketing techniques to understanding how you eradicate human poverty. And so she'll go along and she'll discover something like, the most important thing probably in Africa is inoculation. If you can get people to inoculate their children against about 5 or 6 diseases at the right age, it makes a huge difference to the general outcomes over sort of 50 years, next 50 years. So the first thing she'll do is she tests about 5 or 6 different alternatives. She finds that if you can make the inoculation process social, so that 2 or 3 mums turn up with 2 or 3 kids, people are much more likely to go.
I think I've read about this.
Yeah, and the other one is 2 kilos of lentils. She actually offers, she goes, if you inoculate your child, and she tests whether it's cost effective to add an incentive of 2 or 3 kilos of lentils. Now, the point I'm making is if you're working at some high up position in the UN, with a budget of $100 million, you don't want to be dealing with this trivial crap, do you? Because it's beneath your dignity. But actually, it's this stuff which is where the difference is really made. It's on the, it's on the things like Amazon One Click that whole fortunes are made. And the Japanese I found very interesting, tiny thing, and it's very interesting in an economics blog, which is everybody's asking the question, why are there so many vending machines in Japan? And there are about, I think, 10 million, which is 1 for every 20 people in Japan. Now, there are a few reasons people put forward, and some of them are a bit true. Well, the Japanese are pretty law-abiding, so you can fill a vending machine with beer, and people won't smash it in and steal it, which is a plus. You couldn't really do that in large
Not
boxes.
in Newcastle, no.
In Newcastle on a Saturday night, a vending machine full of beer isn't going to last very long. There are a few other things. The Japanese are very polite, so sometimes it's very tedious buying from a human being. But then someone else wrote in the blog, and they said, you're asking actually the wrong question. The question maybe you ought to ask is, why are there so few vending machines in the West? They said, what the Japanese have discovered, quite simply, is that most of the vending machines are actually outside shops that are open 24 hours a day and sell the same stuff the vending machines sell. What they simply discovered is if you offer people 2 ways of buying, which is go to a person, go to a machine, you sell about 50% more than if you only offer 1. And it's just to do with mood, preference, whatever it might be. That sometimes, I don't know if you're the same, at a station, sometimes you'd rather use the machine to buy your ticket, sometimes you'd rather... Do you still live in Somerset, by the way? Or?
Don't talk to me about my last divorce.
Oh, no, I won't talk about my last divorce. But sometimes you buy the ticket from a machine, sometimes you want to talk to a person.
No, it's true.
And actually, with an impulse buy, like a newspaper or a hot drink or a cold drink or a beer, if you offer 2 modes of purchase, phone or coupon, you'll sell quite a bit more than if you only offer 1. So the interesting question is, actually, what the Americans and the British haven't realised is that, I've noticed, interestingly, Burger King and a few of these places like KFC have started to offer that touchscreen ordering, haven't they, at the entrance to a Burger King or whatever, where you can order and pay by credit card and go and select and accept. Now, the point about that is Argos found the same thing. Every time you added click and collect, ring and reserve, click and deliver, you sold quite a lot more. And so one of the vital things, it's never going to win anybody either a Nobel... Well, it might win Esther de Fleur a Nobel Prize, I guess, but it's never going to win you an advertising award. But simple things like offer people many ways of purchase. Should press ads have a text option? Yeah, but it'll make a very, very big difference to how much you sell. But I think that disproportionality thing is really important because it's so beneath everybody with the power to change these things regards them as beneath their dignity. And it strikes me.
Well, this is a great paradox, isn't it? That
Yeah.
when people by the time people get to the top of large organisations, they're so far up their own arses that they can't be bothered with this sort of thing.
Well, I suggested that all organisations to have a guy called the Director of Detail, who's on the board, has limitless power but no budget. So the only thing he can affect are the little things that actually make a real difference. Because actually, giving everybody a large amount of power and a large amount of money may be a great mistake.
Catastrophe.
Certainly in terms of service organisations in hotels. The things, when you stay in a hotel, the things that are really fucking annoying generally aren't very big things at all. Have you ever stayed in a hotel room where you can work out how the lights...
No, and the more expensive the hotel, the harder it is. Yeah.
Then there's that confusing thing that there's a very lovely thing I always thought was funny, which was everybody used it. One of the England players who went out to South Africa was particularly chavvy. I can't remember which one it is, but he always travels with large amounts of extended and very chavvy family. And by England player standards, that must have been very chavvy
amazing.
indeed. But the Pop Bitch was laughing at one of his members of his extended family because when they'd been to some previous tournament in Italy, she said, "Call this a 5-star hotel. There isn't even a bleeding kettle in the room." Okay. Well, in her defence, I think that's a fair point. I find it bizarre that the more expensive the hotel, the less likely they are to provide basic tea making stuff. Because I'm never going to reach a point in my life where
it's true.
I want to make my own tea sometimes. You know, I mean, not all the time, maybe. But sometimes you just...
It's just a way of extracting more money.
It's just a way of extracting another £3 from delivering a...
And who's one of the... Is it Freakonomics where they're talking about the fact that you get free Wi-Fi
at a cheap hotel,
but not
an
an
expensive hotel is £20 a day.
Yeah, they're going to hit you up.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, yeah. Now, all the French sort of Fourmalune hotels I was at the last week, it was free. Because the idea is then, I suppose, it's a price-sensitive audience and it's quite often a business audience, I suppose, whereas you have an expensive hotel, actually, you're at a level of seniority where you can claim for it. Brilliant thing called Camels and Rubber Duckies, which is a blog which explains that you can't sell software. You can sell software for $900, or you can sell it for $900,000, but there's no market in between. Because the basic guy in the IT department's probably got authorization on his Amex card to buy $800 software without requiring any further approval. The second you want to go above $1,000, suddenly he's going to require a whole step level of authorization, which means the software company has to employ a really large and convoluted sales force to deal with everybody. And to support the sales force, you now have to charge $90,000 for your software, not $3,500.
Bloody hell.
So there's this whole economic thing, that there's this vast gulf where you just, $5,000 software, there's just no market. Because you couldn't afford to produce the sales force that would be necessary to go through the levels of corporate authorization and crap in order to sell it. But any suggestions? There's one interesting suggestion here. You blog and use Twitter and use Facebook and so on, so I'll take that as a yes. If you had a company that wanted to bring sales and marketing and those two functions closer together, typically B2B, but particularly in B2B, what would you advise them?
This is an interesting subject. I once wrote something about this. There is a curious paradox that I've noticed almost without exception, that sales people hate marketing people, almost without exception. Sales people have a deep, burning contempt for marketing people. They think they're a bunch of posing wankers, which is really strange because sales is part of marketing.
Yeah.
So that's one interesting thing. The second interesting thing is that in many companies, because people do not ask themselves simple questions about the functions within their organisation, in quite a few companies, marketing reports to sales. This is bizarre. If marketing is, as defined by the Chartered Institute of Marketing, God bless them, any activity whereby you find out what people want and deliver it to them as a profit, sales has to be incorporated within that.
Yeah.
And there is such animosity between sales and marketing departments, in my experience, I mean, almost universally.
Yeah.
The marketers are seen as a bunch of limp-wristed fairies, and these marketing people in turn regard the salespeople as a bunch of hairy-arsed barbarians. The salespeople think we're living in the real world. The marketing people are divorced from the real world. They don't have to go out and bloody well get results, yeah? And I'd actually suggested this to somebody, I think who was paying me for advice probably. I said, you should really try to get them together and get a system whereby they are each required to help with each other's problems and they are going to be rewarded. The marketing person who comes up with the best solution for the sales department's problems will get rewarded, and vice versa, because that's the only way you get these people to understand each other's problems and get something done about this great divide, because it is a great divide, is by reward, I believe. So I think that's a very good question. And that's what I would do. Fortunately, it's something I've given some thought to.
I mean, it's always interested me in dealing with marketing departments how little they actually asked salespeople for advice.
Look, this is amazing. I'll give you an example. Now, I was telling you, my partner is Italian, so her English is not perfect. And when she joined me, she had spent 5 years, she's actually a doctor of philosophy, and so she's pretty bright. She had just spent 5 years working in every single department of one of the largest gaming organisations in Europe.
Computer gaming or?
No, real gaming.
Betting.
I mean, and the things she can tell you about human beings and how to... Well, the best story I love is about the guy who'd been spending a hell of a lot of money with them. Talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, of euros. And while she was away, somebody upset this guy, and he took his business away. And she was just about to leave to join me, and they said, "Have you any ideas?" And she said, "Send him a magnum of Bollinger with a message simply saying, 'We hope you have happy memories of your time with us.'"
Ooh.
And he came straight back. So one magnum of
That's
Bollinger...
loss aversion to a behavioural economist. That's genius. Sorry, keep going, yeah.
So he came back. And she'd taken the trouble to find out, and this is what selling is all about, yeah? She had taken the trouble to find out all about this guy. She knew that he was actually a very wealthy lawyer who had been laid up with a bad leg. Yeah? But she'd got to know him. If you want to sell, you've got to get to know people. But the point of the story I was going to tell was that when she joined me, the first big job that I asked her to work on was Everest, which is a tremendous challenge. If there is anything that people like less than having a double glazing, because they always think of Everest in terms of double glazing, although they do lots of other things, few things relish the prospect of somebody coming in to sell double glazing or a new driveway or a new patio or whatever it may be. And so she said, well, let's get their best salesman, if we can, to give us a pitch. So we rented somebody else's flat and pretended to be a couple who were thinking of buying double glazing, and we got arranged for this salesman who didn't know that we weren't genuine prospects to come along.
Right. How did you get a good one?
Well, because we arranged it with the company.
Oh, gotcha.
And he came along, parked his Mercedes around the corner, because these guys make a lot of money, yeah? And I was curious to know how he would overcome the big obstacle, because for anybody who doesn't know who's watching this, Everest is bloody expensive, yeah, they are not cheap. You can get something quite similar for a great deal less, you know. How was he going to overcome the great problem of price? And at one point, I was looking at some CDs that were in this person's flat. And he said, are those yours? Yes, I said, lying, because it was supposed to be my flat. And he said, you won't be able to afford many of those when you've paid for this lot. So he immediately answered my question. Yes, it's expensive. He also set my expectations so that when it came to the close, we were pleasantly surprised at the price.
Oh,
and then he rang.
Oh, joy, fantastic. Yeah,
and this is a guy. This is salesmanship in any century you like.
Yeah.
He then followed up for 6 months on the telephone before he gave up. Yeah, he followed up for 6 months. Persistence alone is omnipotent was the favourite quotation of the man who got McDonald's going. Actually a quote from Calvin Coolidge, the American president. Persistence alone is omnipotent. So what did we do then, or what did she do then? She then went away and wrote a direct mail package based upon this salesman's pitch, or it not illuminated by this salesman's pitch, yeah, what she'd seen him do. That direct mail package, which is her first attempt at a big direct mail package in somebody else's language, improved response by 42%, increased conversions to sales.
It set high expectation of price early, did it? Or yeah.
He dealt with you. I have a friend in Philadelphia called Denny Hatch, who is the man who, with his late partner, Axel Anderson, did the biggest single, I don't know what you could, compendium of the world's best-selling mailing packs, which were in America. And I remember I was actually talking in Chicago many years ago, and I was immensely flattered when Axel Anderson came to watch me. And afterwards we got talking, and I said, so what did you discover from all these mailings, the mailings that have done better than any other mailings, in the toughest market in the world, where people get paid the most money? What did you discover? He said every single mailing opened with an appeal either to greed or it flattered people. And flattery makes people feel good, and also the thought of getting something good for nothing makes people feel good. I suspect that the exchange of reciprocal things, you give me a little thing, I give you a big thing, will make a big difference. And there was something you said to me that sums up the one other quality that I think you need as a salesman. Low cunning.
Yeah.
Low cunning. So when I started out in the advertising business, my training, the thing that got me interested in direct marketing, was I had clients who sold things door to door. And they used to sell vacuum cleaners. And I always relished this story of the going back to the days when there were still places that were just had gas, they didn't have electricity, of the salesman who knocked on the door of a very poor, in a very poor region in Manchester, in Salford probably, and the door opened, and he was there to sell electric vacuum cleaners, and his opening line was, "It's coming. Electricity is coming." I think that's the other, going back to David Ogilvy, he had a bit of cunning. He had a bit of cunning. He was very clever, very, very clever at handling people.
My favourite, we worked for a time with Radio Rentals, and a few of their, I think it was their sales force, had encouraged the delivery men very, very effectively, whenever they were delivering a new, larger 32-inch or whatever it was, colour television, or 28-inch colour television, this is back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, to accidentally on purpose attempt to deliver it next door. "Oh, Mr. Johnson, it's your new 28-inch colour. Oh, you're not Mr. Johnson, he's next door. I'm terribly sorry." And they found that at one occasion in 3, the next door neighbour was in at Radio Rentals a few weeks later buying the same thing.
This is a variation. Well,
sorry, it's cunning, but it is beautiful.
But this is a variation on going back to Claude Hopkins as one of the letters in one of it. I think in My Life in Advertising is the letter that he writes to the person who's just moved into a property, and the other technique was writing a letter to the person next door to the person you've just sold to, what they used to call shadow mailings.
What was that? What's that film which, of course, has the person making a fortune selling Bibles to the recently widowed? Do you remember?
I don't know that one.
The two other incredibly clever sales scams. One of them was effectively you go around, you read the obituary columns of a newspaper. Is it Shine on Harvey Moon or something? Is that what it's?
Sounds a bit like it. It does say, yeah.
And the basic thing is you just go to the obituary pages, then go to the widow and say, "Your husband ordered this Bible, is he around?" And of course, knowing full well the man was dead, but the widow was bound to buy it and pay for it. There was an extraordinary case, 2 utterly brilliant cases of low cunning but brilliant salesmanship. One of them was a completely authentic catalogue of sex aids, smut, XXX porn, etc. Okay, which was a completely bona fide business, and except it kept no stock whatsoever. So people would send in orders, and they'd always get a reply which just said, "Terribly sorry, sir, but the huge throbbing rabbit vibrator you ordered is currently out of stock. Please accept with our compliments a full refund." And it was a cheque, completely good if you paid it into your bank, but the cheque had in very large print on the top, XXX adult sex toys and films. They simply found that about 80% of people never paid the cheque into their bank and ripped it up. So 100% profit margin, no product supplied, completely legal, which I have to say is a work of genius. The other one was a business which sent invoices for pornographic films to the recently dead. And this business made a fortune for years and years and years, basically invoicing for filthy films. And everybody, in every case, the executors paid up without questioning and just thinking, John obviously had a bit of a dirty secret.
Bloody hell.
So you besmirch someone's reputation in the eyes of their executors. However, they got rumbled when they sent an invoice to a man who was not only, I think, a Baptist minister of kind of unimpeachable morality, but also had been blind for 25 years. So at that point, the executors smelt a rat and said, on two reasons, on two counts, this is pretty implausible. He's a Baptist minister and he's blind. And so this whole organisation got rumbled. But a piece of, again, the low cunning, you have to sort of have to grudgingly admire it in a sense. But that's been wonderful. Anything more you'd like to add? Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
And on behalf of Brian, who was telling me you used to go over to Canada regularly every year, and he'd fly you over and take you for a magnificent meal, and you'd abuse him. But he said it was worth it absolutely every time.
No, he sent me a very nice message about 3 years ago. I gave him some advice, which was good.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. It certainly worked, doesn't it? Yes.
He's done well. He's done well.
Thank you very much indeed. Drayton Bird. Thank you.